I still remember the exact moment it all changed. I was sitting in the corner office I'd worked my whole life to earn, staring out at the city skyline like I'd done 1,000 times before. My name was on the door, my sweat and soul in every inch of that place, but none of that mattered anymore. Because at that very moment, I was being told calmly, like they were discussing the weather, that my position was being handed over to someone else. And not just anyone, the boss's son. I'm 38 years old. I'd been with the company for over a decade. I started as an analyst, working 16-hour days, making sacrifices I'd never even thought possible. Late nights, missed birthdays, relationships. That fell apart because I was married to the job. And it had paid off, at least. I thought it had. I'd built a name for myself. I was the person everyone came to for solutions, the one who could fix a problem before it became a crisis. But none of that mattered when the boss's son showed up. He was fresh out of college, a kid who thought his last name was enough to put him on top. And apparently it was, because I was told to clear out my office by the end of the week. No warning, no explanation beyond a forced smile and a half-hearted apology. It was surreal, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to understand how everything I'd built could be stripped away so easily. The boss, Mr. Clint, didn't even have the decency to tell me himself. He sent his HR puppet, who couldn't even look me in the eye as she recited the company's new vision for the future. A vision that apparently didn't include me. I wanted to scream.
Ow.
I wanted to stand up and demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, stunned, while the words washed over me like a cold tide. My mind was reeling, 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears gone in an instant. Placed by someone who'd never had to earn a thing in his life. As I packed up my things, I could feel the weight of every late night, every compromise I'd made for that job. And now, it all felt like a cruel joke. The worst part was the silence in the office, the way people I'd mentored, people I'd stood up for, couldn't even meet my gaze as I walked out. I stepped out into the hallway, my box of belongings in my arms, and I felt like I was walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare. My mind was racing. What would I do now? How could I start over when everything I'd known was gone? One thing was clear. I was done being the one who took it on the chin. I wasn't going to be the victim of someone else's privilege. Not this time, not ever again. The first few weeks after I was replaced felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion and anger. Every morning I woke up with that gut punch feeling in my chest, like I was falling off a cliff and couldn't stop. I tried to stay busy, tried to remind myself that I was more than that job, but every time I thought about how icily they'd thrown me away, the bitterness rose up in my throat like bile. At first I did what everyone tells you to do. I updated my resume, reached out to old contacts, and tried to tell myself that this was just a setback. But at night, when the city lights flickered outside my window, I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why was I so easily replaced? And why him of all people? I started hearing things through the grapevines. Mall whispers, half-finished sentences from colleagues who still checked in on me. The boss's son, Jordan, wasn't exactly thriving in his new role. He'd never been cut out for the grind, and it showed. But no one would say that out loud. Instead, they'd say things like, he's adjusting, or he's getting there. It was code for, he's screwing everything up. One evening, I met an old friend from the office for drinks. She looked around nervously before leaning in close. I shouldn't be telling you this, she said, her voice low, but there's talk that Jordan's been making some questionable decisions. Big contracts going to his buddies. Money that doesn't seem to be accounted for? She paused, watching me carefully. I thought you should know. I felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or just the raw hunger for answers. I needed to know if there was more to this than just nepotism. If they'd not only replaced me, but were using my work, my reputation, as a shield for their own schemes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if this was bigger than me just losing my job? What if the company I'd given everything to was now being run into the ground by someone who didn't care about anything but his own gain? I started digging. Carefully, quietly. I still had friends in the office, people who owed me favors, people who trusted me. I asked questions, phrased carefully so no one would know how deep I was going. And bit by bit I started to see the shape of something ugly lurking just beneath the surface. Expense reports that didn't add up. Meetings behind closed doors that no one could explain. Vendors I'd never heard of getting huge contracts. It was like someone had turned the company into their personal ATM, and the more I found, the more it felt like a slap in the face. They hadn't just replaced me, they'd used me. My systems, my processes, all turned into a smokescreen for whatever game they were playing. I couldn't prove any of it yet. Every lead was just a whisper, every document a copy of a copy. But I knew in my gut that there was more. And every night, as I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of whiskey and a stack of notes, I felt the anger growing like a fire in my chest. There were days when I questioned if I was just seeing what I wanted to see. Maybe I was letting my anger blind me, turning every shadow into a conspiracy. But then I'd remember the way HR's voice trembled when they told me I was out. The way no one looked me in the eye, and I knew I wasn't imagining this. Something was wrong. I wasn't going to let it slide. The worst part was knowing that the man, who had once been like a second father to Mr. Klein, had let this happen. Or maybe he'd orchestrated it himself. That thought was a poison that burned in my veins. I'd spent years proving myself to him, thinking he saw me as family. But in the end, it was his own blood that mattered, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything else. I didn't have a plan yet. Didn't even know what I was going to do if I found the proof I needed. I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just walk away and let them tear down everything I'd helped build. I wouldn't let them get away with it, so I kept digging. And with every half-truth and every quiet confession I unearthed, I knew I was getting closer. Closer. To something that would change everything. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday night, the kind of night when the world feels like it's been swallowed by the rain. I was hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, lit only by the flickering light above the stove. I'd been combing through public records vendor filings, payment logs, anything that might connect the dots. My eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen, but I didn't care. I was so close, I almost missed it. Buried in a bland-looking invoice was a payment to a company I'd never seen before, Linden Creek Consulting. It was listed as a strategic partnership, a generic term that meant nothing on paper. But something about it felt off. I couldn't explain it. It was instinct. The same gut feeling that had helped me spot countless problems before they turned into disasters. The vendor name was State Filings. And that's when I saw it. Linden Creek was registered to a friend of Jordan's, a name I remembered from his social media posts, and bragging about new cars and exclusive deals. My heart started racing. I dug deeper, piecing together every invoice, every payment. Over 6 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled to this shell company. I leaned back in my chair, breathing hard. There it was, proof that they weren't just incompetent, they were stealing. They were using my systems, my own processes to do it. Felt like a knife in my back all over again. But this time, it was different. I wasn't just some pawn they could move around the board. I was done being the victim. I spent the next few days gathering every scrap of information I could find. I reached out to the few people I still trusted, people who'd seen enough to know something was wrong. Late-night phone calls, careful questions over coffee. Every conversation felt like walking on a knife's edge, but I knew I couldn't trust anyone outside that tight circle. One of those conversations was with Lisa, a former colleague who'd always been sharp as a tack and just as loyal. She was still inside, still dealing with the fallout of Jordan's reckless decisions. I met her in a quiet diner on the edge of the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes tired but focused. "I've been noticing it too," she said, her voice low. Voices that don't add up. Projects that suddenly go dark. I tried to bring it up, but HR shut me down. She paused, searching my face. "What are you going to do with this?" "Ty?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going to let them get away with it. They took everything from me. I'm going to take it back. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Whatever you need, I'm in. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for the truth. For the people who still believed in what we'd built, I started documenting everything meticulously, like I was back in my analyst days. Spreadsheets of vendor payments, screenshots of emails, copies of contracts that smelled like fraud. Every piece of the puzzle went into a folder on an encrypted drive locked down tight. Wasn't going to confront them without a plan. I knew better than that. If I was going to take them down, I had to be smart, strategic. The hardest part was keeping my emotions in check. Every time I looked at Jordan's smug face in those emails, every time I saw Mr. Klein's signature on a document that made the theft look legitimate, it felt like my chest was going to crack open, but I couldn't let the rage blind me. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Anger was a weapon, but only if I controlled it. As the days turned into weeks, I started to feel like I was living two lives. By day, I was just another unemployed guy trying to figure out his next move. But at night, I was a detective, an investigator, gathering the threads of a conspiracy that went deeper than I'd imagined. And with every new discovery, the weight of what I was doing grew heavier. I knew that when I finally made my move, there would be no going back. I wasn't just risking my reputation, I was risking everything. But the alternative was to stay silent, to let them destroy everything I'd worked for. And that wasn't an option. One night after another marathon session of piecing together the puzzle, I sat back and looked at the growing stack of evidence. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me, tired, worn, but determined. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who believed that hard work and loyalty were enough. That man was gone. In his place was someone who understood that. The world wasn't fair. Sometimes you had to take the fight to them. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. I wasn't done yet, but I was ready. It was a cold Tuesday morning when I walked back into that building. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands slick with sweat, but my mind was clear. I had spent weeks gathering every shred of evidence, every invoice, every shady email, every paper trail that tied Jordan and his cronies to the theft. And today, I was going to put it all on the table. I had an appointment with Mr. Klein, officially. It was a friendly catch-up, a chance for him to pretend he still cared about my future. But in reality, it was a confrontation, a reckoning. As I rode the elevator up to the top floor, I watched my reflection in the polished metal doors, jaw set, eyes hard. I wasn't here to beg for my job back. I wasn't here to ask for explanations. I was here to show them that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. The receptionist gave me a tight smile as I stepped off the elevator, her eyes flickering with something like recognition. She must have known this wasn't just a courtesy call. I nodded at her and pushed open the heavy wooden door to Mr. Klein's office. He was there. Behind his massive desk, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, he looked older than I remembered, lines etched deeper into his face. Jordan was there too, lounging in one of the leather chairs like he owned the place. He smirked when he saw me, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Ty," Mr. Klein said, standing up and extending his hand. "It's been too long." I took his hand, my grip firm. "It has," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I felt like I was balancing on a knife's edge. I took a seat across from them, laying the folder I'd brought with me on the table. Between us. "What's this?" Jordan asked, his voice casual, almost bored. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he had nothing to fear. I met his gaze. "This," I said slowly, "is everything you've been hiding. Every contract you funneled to your friends. Every dollar you stole from this company." The smirk faltered for just a second before he laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Ty. You're reaching. You're bitter. You've been out of the loop too long enough," I cut in. I turned to Mr. Klein, holding his gaze. "I have the invoices, the payment records, the emails. I know exactly what's been going on here, and I think you do too." Mr. Klein's face was a mask, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You're making serious accusations, Ty. I hope you have more than just rumors." I opened the folder, sliding the first document across the tabla payment to Linden Creek Consulting, signed off by Jordan himself. "This is just the beginning," I said. "There's more, lot more." For a moment there was silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Ooh. Jordan's face had gone pale, his smirk gone. Mr. Klein picked up the paper, his eyes scanning it, his lips pressed into a thin line. "You're bluffing," Jordan snapped, his voice rising. "This doesn't prove anything. You're just trying to make me look bad because you couldn't handle being replaced." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You think I'd come in here without proof? You'd think I'd risk everything on a hunch? I have enough here to bury you? If you think I won't, you're even more of a fool than I thought." Mr. Klein looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Wait. You want Ty?" he asked quietly. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. "I want you to do the right thing," I said. "I want you to clean this mess up. Because if you let this continue, I'll take it public. I'll take it to the board, to the media, to the authorities. I'm done staying quiet." Jordan slammed his hand down on the table. "You're bluffing," he repeated. But his voice was shaking now. "You don't have the guts." I turned to him, my eyes cold. "Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mr. Klein let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "Leave it with me," he said. His voice was calm, but I could see the storm behind his eyes. "I'll take care of it." I stood up, gathering my folder. "I'm not going to disappear," I said. "I'm not going to let this slide. You have a week. After that, I go public." I walked out of that office. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in weeks' power. I wasn't just the guy they'd thrown out anymore. I was the one holding the cards. And I knew in that moment that no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever again. The fallout was swift and brutal. Word spread through the company like wildfire. What had been whispers in the shadows was now out in the open for everyone to see. The board didn't waste any time. They launched a full investigation, combing through every deal Jordan had touched. Every contract that reeked of fraud. Jordan tried to bluff his way out, of course. He spun stories about how it was all just a misunderstanding, that he was only doing what was best for the company. But the evidence I'd laid out was too damning. Every lie he tried to spin unraveled in the face of cold, hard facts. Within days, he was going to escort it out of the building by security, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and hollow. As for Mr. Klein, he tried to salvage what was left of his reputation. He held a closed-door meeting with the board offering apologies and promises to clean house, but it was too late. Trust he'd once commanded had vanished. Rumors swirled about his retirement, a quiet exit to save face. I watched it all from the sidelines, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I'd spent years looking up to that man, believing in his vision, his promises. To see him brought low by his own failures, by his own son's greed, was a bitter pill to swallow. But part of me knew it had to happen. Justice had to be done, even if it meant tearing down the illusions I'd once clung to. As the weeks passed, the company began to right itself. New leadership was brought in, people who cared about more than just their own pockets. I got calls from former colleagues, some thanking me for having the courage to do what they'd all suspected needed to be done. Others just wanted to talk, to share stories of how the lies had hurt them too. But for me, the real victory wasn't in the chaos I'd exposed. It was in the quiet that came afterward, the sense of peace I felt knowing I'd stood up for what was right. I didn't get my old job back, and I didn't want it. That chapter was over. But I had something better now, a clean conscience, and the knowledge that I wasn't the kind of man who let injustice go unchecked. Still, the scars were there. There were nights when I'd lie awake, thinking about all the years I'd given to that company, about how quickly it had all been taken away. But even those memories felt different now, less like wounds, and more like reminders of how far I'd come. Because in the end, I'd faced them down. I'd fought for the truth. And no matter what came next, I knew I'd never let anyone take that from me again. In the months that followed, my life took on a quiet, deliberate rhythm. I didn't rush to find another job right away. I needed time to figure out who I was without the title. without the constant push to prove myself. I spent long days walking in the city, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering pieces of myself I'd buried under late nights and endless deadlines. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. There was no more racing to put out fires, no more constant worry that I was one mistake away from losing everything. Instead, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known I was missing, freedom that came from knowing I'd done the right thing, even when it cost me. Betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it had also taught me something vital, that my worth wasn't tied to a job title or a corner office. It was in how I faced the hardest moments, how I refused to back down when I was pushed aside. It's how I stood up for the truth, even when it meant going alone. I started consulting, working with smaller companies that needed someone who knew how to build things the right way, someone who understood that integrity mattered as much as profits. It wasn't as glamorous as the corporate ladder I'd spent so long climbing, but it felt more real, more honest. And in those quiet conversations with clients, I found a new purpose, helping others build something solid, something that wouldn't collapse under the weight of hidden lies. One afternoon, I found myself back in the neighborhood where the old office stood. I paused outside the building, watching the people streaming in and out, their faces bright with ambition and purpose. There was a time when I'd thought my future was tied to those glass walls and high-rise views. But standing there now, I felt nothing but a quiet satisfaction, because I knew that chapter was over, and I was okay with that. I wasn't that desperate, eager to please kid anymore. I was someone who'd faced betrayal and come out the other side stronger. Someone who'd learned that real power isn't in the title you hold, it's in the choices that you make when no one's watching. I thought of the people who'd helped me along the way. Lisa, who'd risked her own job to give me the truth. The colleagues who'd reached out in quiet solidarity. Even the strangers who'd become allies in those long, lonely nights of digging for answers. They reminded me that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. There are still days when I think about everything I lost, but more and more, I find myself focused on what I gained. A clearer sense of who I am, a deep understanding of what really matters, and a quiet confidence that no one can take that from me. As I walked away from that building, I felt a kind of finality settle over me. The city stretched out before me, endless and alive with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was walking toward something new. I'd learned the hard way that trust has to be earned and that betrayal cuts deep. But I'd also learned that the hardest fights, the ones that leave you bruised and raw, the ones that show you who you really are and who I am now, I'm someone who knows how to fight. Someone who knows that no matter how many times life tries to knock you down, you always have a choice. To stay down or to stand up, stronger and wiser than before. And that's the choice I'll make every time. Looking back, I realize now that the worst moments, the ones that make you feel like the ground has been ripped out from under your feet, are also the ones that show you what you're made of. When I was blindsided, when everything I'd worked for was snatched away in an instant, I thought I was broken. I thought I was finished. But what I've learned is that resilience isn't just about getting back up. It's about finding the knee. Courage to stand taller than you ever did before. It's about understanding that you're not defined by the people who betray you or by the titles they strip away. You're defined by the choices you make when the world tries to tell you who you are. I used to think my worth was tied to a nameplate on a door or the approval of people who never really saw me. But now, I know it runs deeper than that. It's in the quiet conviction to do what's right, even when it's the hardest thing in the world. It's in the refusal to let someone else's greed become your defeat. We all have moments in our lives when we're faced with a choice to let the weight of betrayal crush us, or to rise and prove that we are more than the sum of our losses. I chose to rise, and I know I'll keep choosing that, no matter what comes next. I share my story not because I think I'm special, but because I know I'm not alone. We all face moments when the ground shifts beneath our feet. We all carry scars from the battles. We've fought some visible, some hidden deep within us. And in those moments, you have to remember, our strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from finding the will to stand up again and again. So to anyone who's ever felt like the world was against them, Who's ever wondered if they had what it takes to fight back know this? You are stronger than you think. And sometimes, the greatest victories aren't the ones that put your name in lights day. They're the ones that let you look in the mirror and know you didn't let the darkness win. That's the truth I carry with me now. It's the legacy I choose to build. And that's the promise I make to myself every single day. I will never let betrayal define me. I will always find my way forward.